Time for our Week 17 Fantasy Championship wide receiver rankings. Ranking the top 36 guys, break down the matchups, everything you need to know. Let's start off this thing with my tier 1 of guys, Puka Nacua, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Jamar Chase, CeeDee Lamb, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. I'm going to talk about Puka to begin with. My wide receiver 1 this week, the first guy having this tier, 24 points per game, coming off a heater, a monster of a game, and once again having no Devontae Adams. I expect him to have a big workload and a good matchup versus the Atlanta Falcons. Jackson Smith and Jigba is my wide receiver 2. Stud, stud, stud. Really enough said here. Top 2 guys in fantasy football with him and Puka Nacua. Carolina ranks top 12 versus wide receivers, but it doesn't really concern me. JSN is matchup proof. 22 points per game, like I talked about earlier. JSN is going to JSN pretty much every single week. And yeah, you just really don't have much to worry about. Similar, Jamar Chase, right up there with him too, just not in the 21, 22 point per game range. He's more in the 19 point per game range, right on the dot. Walking into the highest projecting game of the week, 52.5 over under. Love the potential for a lot of points scored in this game, and both defenses are pretty bad and some of the worst in the league. So look for Joe Burrow to kind of do something similar to what he did last week. Throw 4 touchdowns. Hopefully, Jamar Chase gets at the better end of the deal in this one. He had like close to 100 yards last week and close to 10 catches, but you hope he comes away with a touchdown, makes that ceiling even higher. CeeDee Lamb, I won't spend too much time on. He played on Christmas Day, the afternoon game. A little bit of a letdown. Didn't kill you, but you kind of hope for more than 10 points, considering that Dallas put up 30 points. Wasn't able to come away with a touchdown. I think Jake Ferguson and Quante Turpin were the guys who found the end zone along with Javonte Williams, but yeah, you're kind of hoping for something a little more from CeeDee Lamb in championship week. Amon-Ra St. Brown, another guy who played on Thursday night, came around with about 15 PPR points. Not really kind of we were hoping for him, but he didn't kill you. 15 PPR points is just fine. Jared Goff played really, really bad, though. Turned the ball over 5 times. Really hurt their chances to extend drives and find the end zone, but not bad considering how bad of a showing most of the Lions players had. Gibbs, JMO, and Jared Goff were pretty measly in this one. Okay, my next tier of guys, I have George Pickens, Nico Collins, A.J. Brown, and Drake London. George Pickens leads this thing off. Mid-range wide receiver 1, he already played. A little disappointing from him and Lamb, like I talked about just a second ago. Again, didn't kill you, but 11, 12 PPR points isn't going to really win you a week. But once again, he didn't get you around the JMO range, which might have killed you. But for George Pickens' range, I think that, 11, 12 PPR points is just fine. You're just hoping for more versus a bad Commanders defense. Nico Collins plays tomorrow, Saturday afternoon. You're hoping for a big game from him. Despite the tough matchup, the Chargers are top 5 versus wide receivers. Nico Collins is really the only guy the Texans seem to trust and go to on a game-to-game basis. So I think Nico Collins is a fine guy to rank here in this range. A.J. Brown walking into a lower projected scoring game than I initially thought, 43.5 over-under in this game. Weather concerns that I've seen online and maybe some concern of snowfall in this one, which could limit the chances of scoring, limit the chances of offensive production overall. But I think Brown continues his late season surge either way. Don't blame him if you view him a little bit lower, a little more closer to a low in wide receiver 1 than a mid-range like I do. But I'm trusting A.J. Brown. He's been on a roll lately. He had a really, really good game last week, and he's facing a Buffalo team that ranks top 10 versus wide receivers, but A.J. Brown has been pretty much the A.J. Brown that we have seen the last couple of years, so I'm trusting it in this one. Drake London, the last guy here. Second game coming off that PCL injury. Didn't have a very good week last week. The Rams, however, they have a pretty good defense. They've had a pretty good defense most of the year, but they rank 6th worst versus wide receivers. Pretty good matchup for Drake London. He's going to be the wide receiver 1, of course. Going to command a lot of targets, but I think the Falcons are going to be playing a lot from behind, which bodes well for Drake London's chances to rack up a bunch of targets, bunch of catches, and hopefully be pretty reliable option and a mid-tier wide receiver 1, which I have him ranked in here. The final 3 guys rounding out my top 12: Chris Olave, Jameson Williams, and T. Higgins. Olave coming off a Week 16 explosion, 37 points, 10 catches for 148 yards and 2 touchdowns. I am not expecting maybe that big of a game, but expecting another big game versus Tennessee defense that is atrocious. Ranks bottom 10 versus wide receivers. Tyler Shuck, the quarterback for the Saints, the rookie quarterback that went in the early second round, has been playing really, really well to end the year. Doesn't look like the Saints will be drafting a quarterback this year, so you just hope him and Olave continue to build that chemistry, and Olave has another big game here in this one in championship week. Jameson Williams came back down to earth in a tough matchup versus Minnesota's number 1 defense versus wide receivers. Just 2 catches, I think 2 for 37. It comes with him, though, and it was something that we were gambling with the entire time, but we know how big of a threat is Jameson Williams to go crazy despite the matchup on a week-to-week basis, so I was willing to roll with it. Maybe we should have ranked him a little bit lower because of the matchup, but that's neither here nor there. T. Higgins, though, last guy here, love the matchup. Biggest over under the week, 52.5. Arizona is middle of the pack versus wide receivers. I expect Joe Burrow to continue playing like he did last week and have a big game versus Arizona defense that has given up a ton of points across the league this entire season. They've been pretty awful down the stretch, and I expect no different with Joe Burrow at the helm and the Cincinnati offense rolling. Okay, time to talk about the high to mid-range wide receiver twos. I got a big group here. I got Jacoby Myers, Justin Jefferson, Cortland Sutton, two guys that already played. Ladd, who's going to play Saturday, and DJ Moore sneak it in here. I'm going to briefly touch on Jefferson and Sutton, who, like I said, played Christmas Day. Jefferson, incredibly underwhelming. The Vikings had just 50 passing yards. Max Crosby's terrible. This Vikings offense has been terrible with the quarterback play all season long. Justin Jefferson had 30 of those yards, but it didn't matter. Like I said, the quarterback play has been so bad. This offense has been so bad that I think it was just worth the play, though, with Jefferson going into the matchup. The Lions were second worst versus wide receivers. They gave up a ton of passing yards week to week, and I thought Max Crosby might be able to put up at least manageable production. Turns out that wasn't the case, but I had no problem rolling with Justin Jefferson, one of the best wide receivers in the NFL, in my opinion, with the money on the line. Sutton is the next guy here. He played Thursday night, Christmas Day night. Commanded 10 targets. He only hauled in 4 of them, though. Finished the game with a pretty measly 8 PPR points, just 40 yards. Couldn't get it done. I'm sorry for those who started him and who really, really didn't get a lot of production for a guy who was rolling down the stretch. I hope that you're able to win your matchup regardless. So let's focus on probably my highest ranked player here. Jacoby Myers. The surging Jaguars wide receiver 1 has commanded 6 targets every single week since joining Jacksonville, just under 14 PPR points in that span. Indianapolis is the 3rd worst team against opposing wide receivers. Love the matchup, love the player, and I love the way Trevor Lawrence has been playing down the stretch, so I have no problem ranking Jacoby Myers this high. Ladd McConkey, play Saturday afternoon against Houston. Tough matchup, but he tore up the Texans last year in the playoffs. If anybody remembers that game, broke the record for most fantasy yards, or the most receiving yards, by a rookie in a playoff game. Can he do it again? Maybe. I think he absolutely can, though, and he has all the talent in the world. Justin Herbert is a good quarterback, and I think that probably we see him have a better outing versus the Houston defense that has been tough on wide receivers, tough on quarterbacks all season long. DJ Moore, the last guy here, 2 straight games with 22 points. Never thought I would say this, but I have a lot of confidence going into this San Francisco game. 52.5 over-under. It is tied with the Cincinnati and the Arizona game with the highest combined point total of the week. Rome Odunze is out once again, and it looks like Luther Burden, who missed last week's game, he is going to be returning off that ankle injury. I think that with him coming off that ankle injury, I think you can pretty much pigeonhole DJ Moore as the wide receiver 1 in this offense. So I'm rolling with DJ Moore as a high to mid-range wide receiver 2. Still sticking with the wide receiver 2s, I have Zay Flowers, Mike Evans, Ted McMillan, Devontae Smith, and Juwan Jennings. All right, Zay Flowers, it's not looking like Lamar Jackson is going to play, which docks him a little bit, really brings down the ceiling in this offense. Tyler Huntley, not the greatest option to be throwing as Zay Flowers, but he is the wide receiver 1. He has a decently high ceiling, and you're just hoping that Tyler Huntley can get him the ball enough versus a pretty tough Green Bay defense, although they are ranked 19th overall versus fantasy wide receivers. They are not very good versus the pass, or they haven't been versus fantasy wide receivers. So you're just hoping for the best there. Mike Evans, not a bad 2 games since returning from IR, 12 and 9 targets in the 2 games he's played. Clearly operating as the team's wide receiver 1. I'm rolling him out with confidence this week, and I know on paper it doesn't look like a great matchup versus Miami, but I think Mike Evans is going to be able to have a manageable performance on Sunday. Ted McMillan coming off a big game, and in a big game versus Seattle. A lot of playoff implications on the line here. Division kind of on the line here. If they lose, they're going to be tied once again with Tampa Bay. Seahawks have a really good defense, but I envision the Panthers going to Ted McMillan a lot in this game. Not a great offense, but I'm betting on the talent at this point and just kind of the target volume that he's gotten in this offense pretty much all season long. And we all love that rookie upside this late in the season. Devontae Smith is here, dropping a little bit. Worried about the weather, of course, like I talked about with AJ Brown. And he's been taking a clear backseat to AJ Brown the last month and a half of the season. If the weather looks better come game time, I think he has the potential to be a great play in a high-scoring game versus Josh Allen and the Bills. So that is something to watch there. The last guy in this tier, though, Juwan Jennings, is probably the one I'm a guy that I'm a little more confident in him than anything, just because of the outlook of the 49ers receiving players situation at the moment. If Pearsall misses again, then I think that he is an easy shoe-in to be a mid-range to low-end wide receiver 2. And even higher if the likelihood of Kittle is that he's going to not play. I know that he came away with that game last week with an ankle injury, kind of left the rest of the game after having a really, really big game. And I think that if those two don't play, it could be an even bigger workload for Juwan Jennings. He could be the wide receiver 1, of course, in this offense. And Brock Purdy is coming up a 5-touchdown game. So I love the matchup. Chicago is not very good versus the pass. and is the highest over-under game of the week at 52.5. My wide receivers 23 through 25. I know I'm cheating a bit here, sneaking Michael Wilson into this tier and calling him a wide receiver 2, a low-end wide receiver 2, but I think that it kind of fit the bill here with Jalen Waddle and Wan'Dale Robinson also in this tier as well. Now that we're on the topic, though, of Michael Wilson, Marvin Harrison Jr. returned last week. He's looking like he's going to play again this week. It really, really hurts Michael Wilson's production. I would have him higher if, of course, if Marvin Harrison Jr. was not playing. He's only had more than 6 targets one time with him on the field this year. I love everything else in this game, though. The potential scoring, Cincinnati's defense, like I said, the 52.5 over under, everything looks great. Just Marvin Harrison Jr. significantly holds him back. I'm just a little more hesitant than I have been the past 5 to 6 games with him when Marvin Harrison Jr. was not on the field. So that's something to watch to see if he can keep up his production with Marvin Harrison Jr. on the field for pretty much the first time all year. Wan'Dale Robinson is the highest guy in this tier. He is darts number 1 in this offense. Fantastic floor mixed with a pretty good ceiling on a week-to-week basis. I expect Jackson Dart to bounce back in a big way after really, really dropping the ball last week. I know it was a tough matchup versus Minnesota, but yeah, like I said, I think he's going to bounce back against a Raiders defense is not very good. Implications for the number 1 overall pick. I don't think Jackson Dart's going to want the Giants to hold the number 1 overall pick once again. So I think that he's going to have a good game, and the Giants are going to come away with a win. Wan'Dale is a great wide receiver 2/flex play. Jalen Waddle, a little bit lower, and maybe some of you might fight back against this, but having Quinn Ewers start at quarterback doesn't exactly excite me. It worries me a little bit more than anything. I think he's going to lead the team in targets, but what kind of upside does that really possess? What kind of upside does that really mean? Once again, like I talked about, I'm just hesitant with Quinn Ewers starting at quarterback, and I'm worried about Jalen Waddle's upside, even though I like the matchup versus Tampa Bay this week. All right, let's move on to the wide receiver 3s, the clear wide receiver 3s for me this week. I will first mention Terry McLaurin. Had a decent game against Dallas on Christmas Day with 11 PPR points. Not going to really win you a week, not going to kill you, but if you had him as a flex play, I think it was completely fine. But other guys in this tier, Stephon Diggs, Emeka Egbuka, Marvin Harrison Jr., and Michael Pittman. We'll first talk about Stephon Diggs. Mr. Inconsistent himself, loves himself a primetime game and seems to be really showing up big in those ones, but this Sunday's game against the Jets is not one of those. Had over 100 yards against them last time, 11 targets, so you just hope that he does kind of the same in this matchup as well. Emeka Egbuka is purely here for upside and what he had shown in the first half of this year as a rookie. Putting aside last week, he has had 7 or more targets in every single game. He's a kind of gamble I do not mind taking. It just hurts that Evans has taken so much of that pie, and Chris Godwin returning has not helped at all either. Marvin Harrison Jr., total dud last week, and he's clearly not healthy. Maybe he's a little healthier come this week. Cardinals have clearly made him the focal point of this offense, or at least one of the focal points on this offense, next to Trey McBride when he's been on the field, and with Jacoby Brissett being a quarterback. I just don't know how productive he's actually going to be. I don't know how healthy he's actually going to be, so I have him ranked behind Michael Wilson, just based off of that, and based off the production that we saw last week when they were both on the field together. Michael Pittman Jr., I feel really bad for him. He's having a great season before Daniel Jones' injury pretty much derailed the entire thing after he tore his Achilles. He's my wide receiver 30 this week. A lot of capped upside with Philip Rivers at quarterback not being able to push the ball down the field. I've lost a ton of faith, and that is exactly why he's so low. But I think he's a fine option versus Jacksonville, who's not exactly great versus the past. They played a lot better as of recently, but I think it's going to be a big division game, and you know how these guys get up for division games at this point in the season. Mid-range to low-end wide receiver 3s. Debo, Brian Thomas Jr., Troy Franklin, Luther Burden, assuming he's healthy, Christian Watson, and Jaden Reed. Briefly touching on some of the guys who already played, Debo and Troy Franklin. Debo almost had 100 total yards, but only 10 PPR points from it. Had only 2 catches. He kind of got going really quick, but that kind of went away. The quarterback play really held him back, and Terry McLaurin on the field, of course, definitely hurts Debo Samuel's production. Troy Franklin mustered just 4 targets, 5 PPR points. Nobody from the Denver Broncos was really serviceable in fantasy outside of RJ Harvey. Bo Nix didn't play very well, and the entire offense wasn't able to get anything going versus Kansas City in a low-scoring game. If you started him here, I'm sorry. Just wasn't a very good play, and someone I was just willing to bet on with Pat Bryant being out with a concussion. Christian Watson and Jaden Reed play Saturday night versus Baltimore. You're hoping for serviceable games from both of them and maybe a big game from one of them, at least one of them. You're just hoping that, I know I have Romeo Doubs ranked the lowest here, that it's not Romeo Doubs, and it's one of Christian Watson and Jaden Reed, the 2 more talented wide receivers who can explode any given week just based on their speed, their vertical threat, and just guys that I'm willing to bet on at this point in the rankings. Brian Thomas Jr. is someone I know. He kind of disappeared last week after having a pretty good 2 to 3 games before that. But he's a guy that I kind of like in a good matchup versus Indianapolis. They're 3rd worst versus wide receivers. I'm rocking with Brian Thomas Jr. after what I've seen the last couple of weeks, not including last week where he was lined up from across from Pat Surtain the entire game. He was kind of used to it as a decoy, so I'm kind of throwing that game out. I think that they're going to probably try to get Brian Thomas Jr. more involved. Right next to Jacoby Myers, maybe not have the same type of target volume as Jacoby Myers, but like we know with Brian Thomas Jr., he can always break off a big play and have a big game just based on the talent that he possesses. Maybe the sneakiest play of the week, Luther freaking Burden. I'm really skeptical coming off this ankle injury. I don't know how close to 100% he's going to be. It kept him out of last week's game in week 16, but without a Dunze, he has commanded a lot of targets around like 7 to 8 a game, tons of upside, rack like a yak god, and just someone I'm willing to bet on and taking a chance on at this point in the rankings as a wide receiver 3. If you have a deeper lineup, if you have 3 wide receiver league, 1 flex, then I think he's an absolute great play in the flex or as a wide receiver 3. So Luther Burden is probably my sneakiest play of the week here. So that is going to be it for my week 17 wide receiver rankings for the fantasy championship week. I hope I could help you guys out a little bit, give you a little bit of more of an in-depth look on what's going on, kind of the injury side of things as well, how healthy each of these guys are and where I am ranking them. But I hope everything goes well. I hope you guys were able to come away with a win in the fantasy championship, win a lot of money, and I will see you guys here soon next week in a video, and we will kind of recap how the season has gone. But I hope everything goes well, and happy fantasy championship week.